The clink of crystal champagne flutes and the synchronized, meandering hum of a hired string quartet were mathematically perfect. But my focus snagged on the single glaring anomaly at the far edge of the manicured estate lawn. I was contracted by the venue management to run discreet, invisible security and background vetting on the VIPs at this outdoor summer wedding reception, an assignment that required blending seamlessly into the background with a tailored tan linen suit and keeping my mouth entirely shut. I don't mind the silence. I prefer data over dialogue. Then I heard Marissa Vale. She stood near the seafood buffet with two other guests, a champagne flute balanced between her fingers and her voice pitched just loudly enough to travel beyond the hedge. That dress would be pretty if it didn't draw attention to the leg. The ugliness belonged entirely to the sentence and the woman who had chosen to say it. It belonged nowhere near Emily Ross, 40 yards away. Emily sat on a weathered wooden garden bench beneath climbing rose bushes, distancing herself from the crowd with the precision of someone who had measured exactly how far she needed to retreat before anyone noticed she was gone. Her light blue floral dress moved softly in the late afternoon breeze. The carbon fiber prosthetic beneath the hem was visible because she had never treated it as a secret and had no obligation to arrange herself around anyone else's discomfort. Her shoulders were locked into a rigid, defensive line. She wasn't looking at Marissa. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. But what immediately set off my internal threat assessment alarms wasn't the petty social friction. It was the physical document crushed in her right hand. The thick, bureaucratic stock paper was trembling just enough to catch the sunlight. That should have been my warning. I don't like variables I can't control, and I categorically refuse to watch a client unravel in real time while I stand by playing the silent observer. Her name was Emily Ross. She was 36, 5 years older than me, the executive director of a nonprofit foundation that archived and preserved historical military correspondence. And exactly 48 hours ago, she had retained my firm on an emergency basis. I am a private intelligence contractor. I deal in lawful corporate intelligence, deep-tier data recovery, and preserving the records people need when an automated system decides to ruin a life. Emily's specific nightmare began inside the city's grant vendor platform. A risk screening program had flagged her profile as a probable match to someone with a criminal financial record. The city had suspended the next preservation grant disbursement while it reviewed the match. The bank had not frozen her accounts, and the city had no power to do so. The damage came another way. The delayed grant created a cash flow gap, and the gallery's property manager invoked a compliance clause tied to the foundation's funding plan. Emily now had 72 hours to challenge the default notice before the company sought to lock the gallery and terminate the lease. She had stopped answering my encrypted messages 3 hours and 14 minutes ago. Her name was on the venue's authorized guest list, so approaching her was lawful even if it crossed the neat boundary between my two assignments. The eviction notice made that boundary feel less urgent. I stepped off the stone patio and onto the gravel path. The rhythmic crunch of my leather shoes drew her attention before I reached her. She looked up, her expression caught somewhere between practiced defense and bone-deep exhaustion. I stopped exactly 3 feet away, keeping my hands visible and my posture relaxed to offset the sharp cut of my suit. The guests congregated by the champagne fountain currently boast a collective credit score significantly lower than my left shoe, I said, my voice clipped, keeping the volume pitched low enough that only she could hear. Their opinions are statistically irrelevant to reality. Why aren't you answering your phone? Emily blinked. The jarring shift in logic interrupted whatever answer she had been rehearsing. She looked at me, then glanced back toward the buffet, where Marissa was pretending not to watch us. Lucian, she exhaled, her voice barely carrying over the distant sweep of the cello. She looked down at the crumpled paper in her hand, her fingers smoothing the creased edge with numb repetition. The property company updated the notice. Their compliance manager isn't waiting for the city's review. They're presenting the default to the board tomorrow at noon. If the board approves it, they'll start the lockout process Monday. She held out the paper. I took it, my eyes scanning the barcodes, routing numbers, and automated signature block. The document did not prove the lease was already dead. It proved the property company intended to treat the grant suspension as a final finding unless someone put admissible contrary evidence in front of its board. I pulled my encrypted phone from my inner jacket pocket, opened a clean case file, and stopped before entering her tenant number. "Do you authorize me to preserve the portal logs and contact the city's data integrity officer?" I asked. Emily looked at the screen, then at me. The tremor in her hand did not disappear, but her fingers stopped crushing the paper. "Yes, preserve everything. I'll handle the board documents." I recorded her authorization, sent a formal data preservation notice to the Municipal Data Integrity Office, and copied the attorney listed in Emily's engagement file. The system returned a receipt number and a warning that no automated record could be altered while the preservation request was pending. It was not a victory. It was a lawful pause in the machinery. "We have a documented hold on the data trail," I said. "Not the eviction. The property board still meets tomorrow." "What do you need right now?" I asked, stripping the command from my voice. "To not be here," she said quietly, looking at the manicured grass. "To not be looked at." I turned slightly, angling my body to block the line of sight from the gossiping guests without touching her or hiding her from the rest of the world. "North exit or the main path?" I asked. "Your choice. My vehicle is in the service lane." "The north exit." We left Marissa and the champagne fountain behind. The drive from the sprawling estate back to the city center was heavy with silence. I navigated the late afternoon traffic with rigid, hyper-focused precision, my mind already building a flowchart of the grant portal, the property notice, and the witnesses we would need before noon. Emily's foundation was housed in a beautifully restored 19th century brick building in the historic district. As we walked up the front steps, my heavy shoe hit the third porch step. It let out a sharp, descending creak, a highly specific sound that registered immediately in my mental map of the environment, a structural flaw I instantly wanted to repair. Inside, the gallery smelled like aged paper, binding glue, and cold, forgotten coffee. To the untrained eye, it was chaotic. To my perfectionist brain, it was a tactile nightmare. Stacks of leather-bound historical ledgers, half-translated Greek independence letters, painstakingly preserved Roman military archives, and replicas of Trojan War artifacts covered the heavy oak tables. My chest tightened automatically. I hate disorganized data. "I need your laptop, your physical banking tokens, and every piece of correspondence you've had with the city planning office in the last 5 years, I instructed, pulling my portable military-grade server from my reinforced bag and setting it on the only clear corner of her desk. "Sit." Emily rubbed the bridge of her nose. Then she looked at me over the mountain of paperwork. "Don't manage me like one of your data streams." I had been hired to solve a system failure, not replace it with myself. I removed my hand from the chair back. "Chair or desk?" I asked. "You decide. I need the physical timeline either way." "Desk," she said. "And you don't open a token, portal, or file I haven't authorized." "Agreed." She set the banking tokens beside the laptop but kept one palm over them until I opened the authorization form. We listed the tenant portal, grant portal, foundation email archive, and property correspondence as separate evidence sources. She initialed each line. I signed beneath her name, then generated the first chain of custody entry. "You don't force a seized bolt. You work it loose," I said, repeating a principle my mentor had drilled into me a decade ago. I powered up the server, the fans kicking in with a low, steady hum. "We start with what moved first." "The grant alert," she said, "then the property notice." "Work it loose." She gave me a look that suggested she had not agreed to adopt my vocabulary. We worked for 6 unbroken hours, though Emily refused to let them remain entirely unbroken. I created a forensic image of the authorized grant portal session, recorded the hash value, and wrote it by hand on the checksum log before sealing the first export to read-only storage. Emily sorted physical notices into chronological stacks and marked every document that arrived before the automated grant suspension. Together, we built a timestamp map across the oak table: grant application, vendor screening, false match, suspension notice, property inquiry, default letter. The only sounds in the gallery were the rapid clack of my mechanical keyboard and the deliberate rustle of fragile archive paper. I operate best in this exact state, hyper-focused, micromanaging data streams, refusing to let an unexplained variable exist in my presence. Every time a processing bar stalled, I looked up and noticed Emily leaning her weight subtly off her right side. She did not complain. She did not ask for a break. When she stepped into the kitchenette for water, I located a solid, ergonomic wooden chair in the back storage room and swapped it for the unforgiving drafting stool. I did not move her files or adjust her workspace by a millimeter. She returned carrying 2 mugs. She paused at the chair, then set one mug beside my keyboard. "Coffee," she said. "No sugar." I looked at it. "You remembered. You corrected the caterer twice when he tried to put syrup in yours at the wedding." She sat down carefully, and the rigid line of her shoulders dropped as the chair supported her back. "Your face looked personally betrayed. The syrup was hazelnut. That explains the severity." I turned back to the screen before she could see the corner of my mouth move. 10 minutes later, I found a ledger inconsistency. "You missed a decimal point in the 2024 tax filing you handed me 10 minutes ago," I said. My eyes locked on the hex code, scrolling down my left monitor. She let out a sudden breath that became a laugh. "You're impossible. You know that?" The laugh caught between the server fans and archive paper. My fingers hovered over the keys, then moved again. The urgency remained, but the room became possible to breathe inside. At midnight, Emily closed my laptop with 2 fingers. I stared at the dark screen. That export was at 98%. "Your right hand is shaking." "It is not." She held up the untouched sandwich she had ordered an hour earlier. 5 minutes. Eat half. Then you may resume your war against percentages." "I don't require—" "Chair or desk?" she asked, borrowing my corrected phrasing. "You decide. The sandwich happens either way." I chose the chair. She ate the other half while reviewing the property correspondence. We worked in a comfortable silence, broken only by paper, coffee, and the specific little tap of her pen whenever a date matched the timeline. The pause cost 5 minutes and prevented 3 errors. By 2 a.m., the code began to fracture. The Municipal Data Integrity Office responded to the preservation notice. Nadia Chen, the officer assigned to the case, confirmed that the vendor system had created an automated identity match event during Emily's grant review. She could place the score in disputed status until noon, but she could not correct it without evidence showing where the merge originated. I compared the vendor's transaction identifier against the checksum preserved audit image. A neighboring county record appeared beneath 4 layers of routing data. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching until my teeth ached. "It's a data merger," I said, my voice dropping to a flat register. The vendor pulled a public criminal record for a convicted fraudster named Amelia Rossi. The matching engine linked her history to your foundation profile. Emily stood, leaning one hand on the desk to read the timestamp map rather than crowding my monitor. "How?" "I have a different identification number, a different address. Everything is different. Your preservation grant application triggered an expedited screening 3 days ago. The vendor used name fragments, birth year, and sector classification before it checked the unique identifiers. It saw Emil Ross assigned a 72% probability and pushed the result into the grant record. The property manager's compliance software then treated the suspended grant as evidence that your funding plan was unreliable." I pointed to the 2 separate columns on our map. The city suspended a payment. The property company issued the default. 2 systems, 1 false link. Her face went pale in the blue monitor light. "The preservation board received the risk alert this morning. They'll remove me before I can explain. And if the property company closes the gallery, the Roman letters go back into private storage. Years of work disappear because a machine thought I looked close enough to somebody else." She looked toward the dark front windows. "Maybe Marissa was right. Maybe people see one thing that doesn't fit their picture, and the rest of me stops mattering. The gallery's aging AC unit rattled in the window. For 1 second, I did not remember the accusations from my own corporate smear campaign 5 years earlier. I did not remember the lawyer's exact words or the number of clients who left. I remembered that same sterile rattle in my office and the absurd thought that I should have eaten breakfast before my company collapsed. I had answered every frightened message from my staff with a thumbs-up emoji, like a coward trying to compress panic into one yellow symbol. I forced the memory out of the driver's seat and looked at Emily. The slight one-sided curve of her mouth came from a fourth-grade bike crash scar she still hated, a uselessly specific fact she had mentioned while explaining why one archive photograph was misdated. I had cataloged it because that was what my mind did. Keeping it because it belonged to her was something different. Emily. I used her name deliberately, letting it replace every title and case number in the room. They saw a prosthetic and made themselves smaller. The vendor saw a partial string and called it a person. I looked at the actual record. She searched my face for the condition, the extra fee, the point where precision would become distance. I already chose you. The server fans turned in the silence between us. We're finishing this. Her fingers loosened from the edge of the desk. What is the exact next step, she asked. Nadia needs the preserved audit image, checksum log, and timestamp map. Your attorney needs the same evidence for an emergency petition. The property board needs formal notice that its default rests on a disputed automated score. Emily pulled the property binder toward herself. I'll build the lease section. You build the forensic section. Work it loose, I said. This time, she repeated it. Work it loose. At 8:15 the next morning, Nadia joined us by encrypted video. Her background was an ordinary municipal office with gray partitions and a plant that looked more regulated than alive. I transmitted the read-only forensic image through the city's evidence portal. She compared the hash value against the checksum log while Emily held the original grant notice beneath the document camera. Nadia looked up from her screen. Your hash values and access logs check out. The merge originated in the vendor system, not Ms. Ross's submission. She entered the finding into the municipal incident record and issued a signed confirmation that the risk score was disputed, pending formal correction. The grant payment could not be restored that morning, but the city would not treat the automated match as a verified criminal finding. At 9 o'clock, Emily's attorney, Celia Moreno, arrived through the gallery's side entrance carrying a legal pad and 2 folders. I had scheduled the property hearing through the building's accessible east entrance and sent all participants the route map. I did not mention it. Emily noticed when the confirmation email arrived and looked at me over the top of her mug. Protective logistics? She asked. Efficient routing. Of course. Celia reviewed the evidence and corrected 3 phrases in my draft notice. You are not filing an injunction with a cyber unit, she said. Nadia's office documents the data incident. I file the emergency administrative petition and the notice of claim. I know the distinction. You wrote injunctive cyberhold twice. I removed both phrases. By 10:30, we had 2 locked deliverables. The first was a signed forensic report containing the preserved audit image, hash values, access logs, vendor transaction path, and chain of custody form. The second was a 3-inch hearing binder with lease terms, the city's disputed score confirmation, grant payment timeline, property notices, and Celia's emergency filing receipt. One problem remained. The property manager could still argue that the delayed grant created a cash flow risk even if the criminal match was false. I placed a certified cashier's check on the table but kept my hand over it. My firm can fund a 6-month escrow reserve while the grant is reviewed. I said, it would be a documented bridge loan to the foundation, approved by your board, with ordinary repayment terms. Do you want that option presented or not? Emily studied the check, not as a gift, not as leverage, and not without Celia writing the terms. Agreed. Celia drafted a short bridge loan agreement at market interest, contingent on preservation board approval and usable only as lease security. Emily called her board chair, Dr. Samuel Hartwell explained the risk and secured a recorded vote authorizing the escrow. Only then did I sign the check over to Celia's trust account. At 11:55, the third porch step let out its familiar creak as we left the gallery. The property management firm occupied a glass-walled conference suite on the 9th floor. The board members sat around a mahogany table, tapping at tablets and treating the possible closure of a public archive like an agenda item to be cleared before lunch. Derek Holt, the municipal liaison assigned to the grant vendor, looked up. He appeared tired rather than cruel, a man who had trusted the machine because checking it required time. "Ms. Ross," he said, "the property hearing concerns your lease. The city review is separate." "Correct," Celia replied. "That is why each agency's authority is identified in your binder." I set the 3-inch binder at the center of the table. The thud made 2 board members look up from their screens. "I am Lucian Rogers, contracted private intelligence for Ms. Ross," I said. The grant vendor merged her clean profile with a convicted fraudster from a neighboring county. The city has confirmed the merge originated in the vendor system and has placed the score in disputed status. The forensic chain is indexed in tabs 2 through 5. Derek turned toward the monitor. Nadia appeared by secure video, her municipal identification visible beneath her name. "I have independently validated the hash values and access logs," she said. "The automated match is not a verified finding against Emily Ross or the foundation. Permanent correction requires vendor review, but the incident record now identifies the profile as disputed due to probable erroneous merger." The property chair opened the binder. Celia placed the emergency administrative filing receipt beside it, followed by the escrow agreement and the trust account confirmation. "We didn't force the system," I said. "We worked the false link loose, 1 timestamp, 1 checksum, 1 witness at a time." The property chair read for nearly a minute. "The company will issue a 30-day written stay of the default while the city completes its correction," she said. "The gallery retains access and possession. The escrow removes the immediate lease security concern." It was limited, conditional, real. Emily stepped forward before anyone could turn the result into a favor they had granted her. "You will state in the written stay that the default arose from an unverified automated match," she said, her voice clear across the glass room. "You will withdraw every reference describing my foundation as a criminal financial risk. You will send the corrected notice to the Preservation Society today, and you will preserve all internal communications concerning the score for the regulatory review." Derek nodded once. That language is accurate. The property chair signed the stay. Celia countersigned receipt. Nadia uploaded her confirmation to the administrative record. Emily signed last, pressing the pen firmly enough to leave an indent on the page beneath it. The gallery doors would remain open Monday. 2 hours later, we sat at the back archive table. I was packing cables, coiling them into exact circles to manage the adrenaline still running through my hands. Emily placed a fresh coffee beside me. No sugar. Then she pulled out the supportive wooden chair and sat across from me without speaking. For 5 minutes, neither of us touched the binder. The silence held the signed stay, tomorrow's work, and the fact that neither of us had left. Emily's phone rang. "Dr. Hartwell was calling from the Preservation Society." "Yes, the gallery remains open," she said. She listened, then glanced at me. "No. My intelligence contractor found the core error and preserved the evidence correctly. His precision saved the foundation today. Route the formal thank you note directly to his firm." I froze with the black cable half coiled in my hand. She had given me the credit where it mattered, without making a performance of it and without requiring me to enter the conversation to claim it. "Was that necessary?" I asked when she ended the call. "Yes. That is not a complete justification. It is the one you're getting." A week later, the city restored the suspended grant payment under an interim order while the vendor completed its correction. Celia's petition remained open until the false profile was formally severed. The property company withdrew the default notice and issued an accountability memo requiring human review before any future lease action based on an automated score. The process took months, not hours. I returned for every review call, After the case stopped requiring Wednesday coffee, I kept arriving on Wednesdays anyway. Emily tested the Roman letter exhibit labels while I checked the mounting hardware without touching her curatorial layout. She learned to leave my server case exactly 6 inches from the wall because anything closer blocked the vent. I learned that the creaking porch step did not threaten the building, and that Emily liked the sound because it announced visitors before the bell did. We argued once over the placement of a security camera. I presented 3 angles. She selected a 4th. It was better. I did not correct her. By autumn, the city had permanently severed Amelia Rossi's record from Emily's grant profile. The vendor issued a correction order and funded an independent audit. The preservation grant was fully restored. The property manager withdrew the eviction notice without reservation, and the bridge loan escrow returned to my firm after the foundation board repaid the documented principal and interest. The open house for the restored Roman military letters filled the gallery with academics, donors, students, and enough competing conversations to make my shoulders tighten on principle. I walked up the path in the same tan linen suit I had worn at the wedding. The 3rd porch step released its familiar descending creak beneath my shoe. I had not repaired it. Inside, Emily stood at the podium in a dark green dress, her carbon fiber prosthetic clearly visible. She concluded her presentation with a translated passage about soldiers writing home not about victory, but about bread, weather, and the people waiting for them. The room erupted into applause. Near the rear display, Marissa Vale stood with a program folded between her hands. She approached Emily after the crowd began to move. I wanted to say, Marissa began, glancing down and then back up. What I said at the wedding was thoughtless. Emily did not rescue her from the silence. The exhibit is open to everyone, Emily said evenly. The conversation about my body is closed. Marissa nodded, accepted the boundary, and stepped away. Emily turned toward me. She did not stop for the donors calling her name. She walked down the center aisle and came directly to the back wall where I was standing. Dr. Hartwell followed, slightly out of breath. Emily, brilliant presentation. The Roman archives are extraordinary. And who is this? Emily did not use my professional title. She looked at me with the same grounded certainty she had carried into the hearing room, only warmer now, tested by months instead of one crisis. This is Lucian, she said, my partner. She placed her hand lightly on my forearm. The touch was brief, practical, and absolute. The 3rd step creaked again as another guest entered, and for once I let an imperfection announce something good without trying to silence it. I looked at Dr. Hartwell, adjusted my stance, and offered a single, precise nod. We were staying. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Real resilience grows when someone protects your choices while helping you challenge the system that failed you. Green flag. Healthy love offers consistency, agency, and reliable action. Toxic passion demands control, urgency, or gratitude. What boundary would make you feel truly supported rather than rescued? Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this. The end.